Before Hollywood knew that Clint Eastwood was capable of death threats, Michael Moore thought he was just another harmless old actor. This is the story of how one sentence at the 2005 National Board of Review Awards turned a casual joke into a shocking threat that silenced an entire room and proved that even at 75, legends don't take disrespect lightly. I would kill Michael Moore if he showed up at my house with a camera. The words hung in the air at the 2005 National Board of Review Awards as Hollywood's elite sat in stunned silence. Before that moment, Michael Moore thought Clint Eastwood was just another harmless old actor. This is the story of how one sentence proved that even at 75, legends don't take disrespect lightly. The tension between Clint Eastwood and Michael Moore had been building for years before their infamous confrontation at the 2005 National Board of Review Awards. The roots of their conflict lay in Moore's 2002 documentary Bowling for Columbine, which had won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature and sparked nationwide debates about gun violence, American culture, and the tactics used by documentary filmmakers. Moore's film had included a controversial segment featuring Charlton Heston, the legendary actor and former president of the National Rifle Association. At the time, Heston was 78 years old and showing early signs of the Alzheimer's disease that would later be publicly disclosed. Moore had arrived at Heston's home unannounced with a camera crew, pressing the elderly actor about his views on gun control and the NRA's response to mass shootings. The interview became one of the most talked about sequences in the documentary, but it also generated significant criticism from those who felt Moore had taken advantage of an elderly man's vulnerability. Heston, clearly uncomfortable and possibly confused, had ended the interview by walking away from Moore's questions, creating a moment that many viewers found deeply unsettling. Clint Eastwood, who had known Charlton Heston personally and professionally for decades, was reportedly furious about Moore's treatment of his friend. In Hollywood's tight-knit community, particularly among actors of their generation, there was an unwritten code about respecting elder statesmen of the industry. Moore's ambush-style interview was seen by many as a violation of that code. The controversy was compounded by the fact that Heston's Alzheimer's diagnosis became public knowledge shortly after the film's release, raising questions about whether Moore had knowingly taken advantage of someone whose cognitive abilities were compromised. While Moore defended his methods as legitimate journalism, critics argued that his approach had crossed ethical boundaries. Clint's anger about the situation was well known within Hollywood circles, but he had remained publicly silent about the issue for several years. This restraint was typical of his approach to industry controversies. He preferred to handle disputes privately rather than engage in public feuds that might damage relationships or create unnecessary drama. However, those close to Clint knew that his loyalty to friends was absolute and that he had a long memory for perceived slights. The treatment of Charlton Heston had struck him as particularly egregious because it involved not just professional disagreement, but what he saw as the exploitation of an elderly man's illness for political purposes. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shock Hollywood and reveal a side of Clint Eastwood that few had seen before, not the controlled professional actor and director, but someone capable of raw, unfiltered anger. The National Board of Review Awards dinner on January 10, 2005, was one of Hollywood's most prestigious events, held annually at the Elegant Tavern on the Green in New York City. The ceremony honored the year's best films and performances, drawing an audience of industry professionals, critics, and celebrities who valued the organization's reputation for serious film appreciation rather than commercial popularity. Clint Eastwood was being honored that evening for his film $1 Million Baby, which had earned critical acclaim and would go on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. At 75 years old, he was at the peak of his directorial powers, having created what many considered his masterpiece about boxing, sacrifice, and the complex relationship between a trainer and his fighter. The atmosphere in the ballroom was celebratory but refined, with round tables seating Hollywood's elite in formal evening wear. The guest list included actors, directors, producers, and critics who represented the most respected voices in American cinema. Michael Moore was in attendance, having been invited based on his continued prominence in documentary filmmaking following his Oscar win for Bowling for Columbine. When Clint rose to accept his award, the audience expected the kind of gracious, brief speech that had become his trademark at such events. He typically thanked his collaborators, acknowledged the honor, and returned to his seat with minimal fanfare. His reputation for economy of words at public events was well established, making his speeches noteworthy for what they didn't say rather than what they did. But something was different that evening. Perhaps it was the presence of Michael Moore in the audience, or the recent publicity surrounding Moore's latest projects, or simply the accumulation of years of anger about his friend's treatment. Whatever the reason, Clint's speech took an unexpected turn that shocked everyone present. After the customary opening remarks about the film and his collaborators, Clint's tone shifted slightly. His voice remained calm and controlled, but there was an edge that experienced observers recognized as dangerous. He began talking about the responsibility that comes with documentary filmmaking, about the trust that subjects place in filmmakers, and about the ethical obligations that should guide those who claim to be seeking truth. The room began to sense that something unusual was happening. Clint's words were becoming more pointed, more specific, and clearly directed at someone in the audience. Heads began turning subtly as people tried to determine who might be the target of his remarks. Michael Moore, sitting several tables away, initially seemed unaware that he was about to become the focus of what would become one of the most shocking moments in awards show history. The moment that would define the evening and create lasting controversy came when Clint Eastwood abandoned the indirect approach he had been using and addressed his target directly. Looking out over the audience with the same steady gaze that had intimidated screen villains for decades, he spoke the words that would silence the room and send shockwaves through Hollywood. "I would kill Michael Moore if he showed up at my house with a camera," Clint said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had made him famous. The statement was delivered without anger, without raised volume, but with the kind of quiet intensity that made it far more threatening than any shouted declaration could have been. The reaction was immediate and visceral. The elegant ballroom, which had been filled with the soft sounds of conversation and clinking glasses, fell into complete silence. The kind of silence that occurs when something so unexpected and shocking happens that people's minds need time to process what they have just heard. Michael Moore, who had been sitting casually at his table, visibly stiffened. His face went pale, and for the first time in many public appearances, the usually confident filmmaker appeared genuinely shaken. The man who had built his career on confronting powerful figures and asking uncomfortable questions was now facing a threat from someone who clearly meant what he said. The audience's reaction was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and nervous energy. Some people looked around to see if others had heard the same thing they had. Others stared directly at Clint, trying to determine if he was joking or serious. A few began whispering urgently to their companions, but most simply sat in stunned silence. But Clint wasn't finished. As if recognizing that some people might interpret his words as hyperbole or dark humor, he delivered the follow-up that removed any doubt about his intentions. "I mean it." Those two words transformed the moment from shocking to genuinely frightening. The matter-of-fact way he said them, combined with his reputation for meaning exactly what he said, convinced everyone in the room that they had just witnessed a genuine threat rather than an inappropriate joke. The tension in the ballroom was palpable. Security personnel, who had been stationed discreetly around the room, began moving slightly closer to both Clint and Michael Moore. Other guests looked uncomfortable, unsure whether they should laugh, applaud, or simply pretend the moment hadn't happened. Michael Moore's spokesperson would later claim that Michael laughed along with everyone else and took Mr. Eastwood's comments in the lighthearted spirit in which they were given. But this official response contradicted what everyone in the room had witnessed: a visibly shaken filmmaker who had just been threatened by one of Hollywood's most respected figures. The immediate aftermath of Clint Eastwood's threat revealed the complex dynamics of Hollywood's power structure, and the different ways that industry professionals processed shocking behavior from respected figures. The room's reaction was not uniform. It reflected the varied relationships, political views, and personal loyalties of those present. Some audience members, particularly those who had been critical of Michael Moore's tactics, began to applaud. This wasn't necessarily approval of the threat itself, but rather appreciation for someone finally confronting Moore directly about his controversial methods. These individuals saw Clint's words as a long overdue defense of Charlton Heston and other subjects who had been treated roughly by documentary filmmakers. Others in the audience appeared genuinely disturbed by what they had witnessed. These were primarily industry professionals who, regardless of their opinion of Moore's work, recognized that public death threats crossed fundamental lines of professional and personal conduct. They sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure how to respond to behavior that seemed completely out of character for someone they had known and respected for decades. The most telling reactions came from those who knew Clint personally. Rather than showing surprise at his words, they displayed the kind of recognition that suggested they had seen this side of him before. His longtime collaborators and close friends understood that beneath his carefully controlled public persona lay someone who was fiercely loyal to friends and utterly unforgiving of those who crossed certain lines. Michael Moore's immediate response was to remain seated and attempt to maintain his composure, but those sitting near him reported that he appeared genuinely shaken. The man who had built his career on confronting powerful figures and asking uncomfortable questions was now facing direct intimidation from someone whose threat carried real weight. The evening's organizers faced an unprecedented situation. Award shows occasionally feature controversial moments, but actual threats of violence were outside their experience. There was no protocol for handling a situation where one of the evening's honorees had just threatened to kill another guest. The decision was made to continue with the ceremony as planned, but the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. Subsequent speakers seemed subdued, and the usual celebratory energy of the event had been replaced by an uncomfortable tension that persisted throughout the remainder of the evening. Security personnel discreetly increased their presence around both Clint and Michael Moore, though no immediate action was taken. The threat had been delivered in a context that made it difficult to determine whether it should be treated as a serious criminal matter or as an inappropriate but ultimately harmless outburst from someone known for his strong opinions. The story of Clint Eastwood's threat against Michael Moore broke in the entertainment media within hours of the award ceremony, creating a firestorm that dominated Hollywood coverage for weeks. The incident represented a rare moment when the industry's usually private disputes became public spectacle, forcing everyone involved to navigate uncharted territory. Initial media reports varied significantly in their tone and interpretation. Some outlets treated the story as evidence of Clint's continued vitality and willingness to defend his friends, framing the threat as colorful but ultimately harmless rhetoric from someone known for his direct speaking style. These accounts emphasized his loyalty to Charlton Heston and his legitimate grievances with Moore's documentary methods. Other publications took a more serious approach, treating the threat as evidence of inappropriate behavior from someone who should have known better. These reports focused on the legal and ethical implications of making death threats in public, regardless of the circumstances that might have motivated them. The most damaging coverage came from sources that used the incident to question Clint's mental state and judgment. At 75, he was facing the same kind of age-related scrutiny that affects many public figures, and his threatening behavior provided ammunition for those who suggested he was losing the restraint and professionalism that had characterized his career. Michael Moore's response was carefully managed by his representatives, who attempted to downplay the incident while still acknowledging its seriousness. His official statement emphasized that he had taken Mr. Eastwood's comments in the lighthearted spirit in which they were given. But this characterization was undermined by eyewitness accounts of his visible distress during the ceremony. Hollywood's response revealed the industry's complex relationship with both figures. Clint's supporters emphasized his decades of professional behavior and his legitimate anger about Moore's treatment of Heston. They argued that his words, while inappropriate, represented an understandable reaction to what they saw as Moore's exploitation of an elderly man's illness. Moore's defenders focused on the chilling effect that such threats might have on documentary filmmakers who tackle controversial subjects. They argued that regardless of anyone's opinion of Moore's methods, threats of violence represented an unacceptable escalation that could intimidate other journalists and filmmakers. The incident also highlighted the generational and political divisions within Hollywood. Older, more conservative industry figures tended to support Clint's position, while younger, more liberal professionals were more likely to condemn his behavior. This divide reflected broader cultural tensions about media ethics, political correctness, and the appropriate ways to express disagreement in public forums. The long-term impact of Clint Eastwood's threat against Michael Moore extended far beyond the immediate media coverage and industry gossip. The incident became a defining moment that revealed important truths about both men and the entertainment industry's tolerance for controversial behavior from respected figures. For Clint, the threat represented a rare moment when his carefully maintained public image cracked to reveal the person beneath. Throughout his career, he had been known for his professionalism, restraint, and ability to handle conflicts without public drama. The Michael Moore incident showed that beneath this controlled exterior lay someone capable of raw anger and intimidation when his core values were challenged. The incident also demonstrated the limits of Hollywood's forgiveness for behavior that crossed certain lines. While Clint's career continued successfully after 2005, the threat against Moore became part of his permanent record, cited by critics who questioned his judgment and temperament. It provided ammunition for those who argued that his political views and personal conduct were becoming increasingly problematic. For Michael Moore, the incident served as a wake-up call about the potential consequences of his confrontational documentary style. While he continued to make films and remained a prominent political figure, the threat from someone as respected as Clint Eastwood highlighted the personal risks involved in his approach to filmmaking. The broader entertainment industry learned that even the most respected figures could behave in ways that shocked and disappointed their colleagues. The incident became a cautionary tale about the importance of maintaining professional conduct, regardless of personal grievances or political differences. Perhaps most significantly, the confrontation illustrated the generational and cultural tensions that were becoming increasingly visible in Hollywood. The dispute between Clint and Moore wasn't just about documentary ethics. It represented broader disagreements about political discourse, media responsibility, and the appropriate ways to express disagreement in public forums. In the years following the incident, both men continued their careers with minimal public interaction. Clint returned to making films and largely avoided discussing the controversy, while Moore continued his documentary work while seemingly avoiding any situations that might lead to similar confrontations. The 2005 National Board of Review Awards became remembered not for the films that were honored, but for the moment when one of Hollywood's most respected figures revealed that even legends have limits to their patience and tolerance. The threat that silenced Hollywood became a reminder that behind every public persona lies a private person with their own breaking point. What do you think justified Clint's reaction? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Don't forget to hit the like button if you liked the video and subscribe if you want videos like this to come. See you in the next story.